Hi everyone, my name is Jagan. Today we are going to learn about the disk partition extension. Okay, in LVM method. In last class we have seen how to create the partition using LVM method. Today in this class we will see how to extend the partition in LVM method. Extending the partition is one of the main advantages of LVM. Disk extension cannot be done by using the basic method. In basic method, the disk extension, disk reducing, that cannot be done. Only the LVM has features to extend the disk or to reduce the disk. Okay, so we'll see how to extend the disk in the partition. Disk extension, disk ex extending on disk reducing in LVM using LVM. Okay, see, before we start extending the disk, okay, disk partition, extending disk partition, extending disk extending is that is done by the VMware team, like adding the disk or extending the disk in the VMware vCenter. But here we are extending the disk partition. Okay, here extending the disk partition. Before we start extending the disk partition, we should ensure that the space is available in volume group. Okay, if the sufficient space is available in volume group, then straight away we can extend the disk partition. Okay, so should note that not before extending the disk partition, ensure that VG VG in this volume group has sufficient space. So volume group must have a sufficient space to extend the LV. Okay, LV logical volume. To extend the logical volume or a partition, the volume group must have the space. Okay, so how to extend the LV? How to extend the LV? So how to extend the LV? What is the command to extend the LV? LV extend hyphen L. L stands for labeling size. Okay. Plus 3G slash dev slash VG slash LV. So directly we can extend the LV if the volume group has a sufficient space. Okay. This is and before after that we have to give the hyphen R. Hyphen R is to resize. Okay. Here hyphen L is the labeling size. labeling size hyphen R is to resize the disk, resize the disk partition. So we must remember here, uh, before we start, there are two things we should remember. And one more thing is, and so as disk extending, disk partitioning, extending the partition is online activity. Therefore, no need to unmount the no need to unmount partition. No need to mount the partition. Okay. So here mounted partition. Uh, Note disk extending the partition is an online activity. Okay. So therefore we don't have to unmount the partition and do the extending the disk partition. Okay. So when we unmount, then there will be no access to the LV. Therefore, we generally unmount and do some changes, but here disk extension unmounting is not required. Okay, so we can extend the partition or LV directly without any downtime. Okay, so if, and one more thing is, so before we start extending this partition, volume group must have a sufficient space, and we don't have to unmount or take the downtime to extend the partition or LV. Okay, so and here L stands for labeling size, hyphen R stands for resizing the partition or LV. Okay, and one more thing is disk extension can only be done with the when the partition is formatted with the ext 3 or 4. XFS, when the partition is formatted with a file system XFS, disk extension cannot be done. So this thing also you need to remember. And note 1 and note 2. Disk extending can only be done when partition is formatted with either ext3, ext4 file system. So this is a very important. Okay, so disk extension, we need to ensure that the partition is done with the formatted with the ext3 or ext4 file system. Okay, and XFS file system, we also have one more file system, that is XFS, but XFS file system disk extension cannot be done with the XFS file system. Okay. Okay, there is a case one. Okay, if a disk has enough space. Okay, let's say this is a case one. Case one. If the disk has if the volume group has a sufficient space, if the VG has a sufficient space, then how to extend the LV? We can extend the LV straight away without any downtime. Okay. And what about if VG has a if VG does not have the sufficient space? Let's say case 2. If the VG doesn't have a enough space, if the VG doesn't have enough space, what should we do? We should coordinate with the VMware team and raise a request with the VMware team to get a new disk. Okay. So what should we do as a Linux admin? Uh, Need to coordinate with the VMware team and raise a request to get a new disk to the VM. Okay. So once the disk is added, once the disk is added to the VM is sorry, disk is converted into PV. Okay. So we have discussed, right? So disk is added. Disk once the raw disk is added to the VM, the raw disk will be converted to the PV, and the PV is added to the volume group. What is the command to convert the PV? PV create /dev /sd h, let's say. This is the command to convert the raw disk to PV. Okay. Then once the disk is converted to PV, then once the disk is converted to PV, then uh, add the PV to volume group. Add the PV to VG. Okay. So add the PV to VG. Like so, then VG extend slash VG extend name of the VG here, VG name /dev /sdh. Okay. So we have created the PV. Okay, raw disk we converted to PV. Then we are extending the volume group. Okay, since volume group does not have a sufficient space, right? So we added the PV. For example, disk this H disk is around 5 GB. Okay, so when we extend the volume group has a sufficient space, let's say 5 GB, because now this physical volume is added to volume group. So volume group we are extending by adding the disk. Okay, so by adding the disk, volume group has a sufficient space. Now by extending VG, VG has enough space to extend the partition. Partition nothing but a LV. Okay, don't get confused. Huh? So uh, the only thing that is required to extend the partition is volume group must have a sufficient space. If the volume group has a sufficient space, then we can extend the LV. If the volume group doesn't have the sufficient space, then we raise a request with a VMware team, and the VMware will add the new disk. This new disk we convert into PV. This PV we add to volume group by extending by issuing the command vg extend, a name of the VG, and a disk what we have convert into physical volume. Okay, now so now we can extend the LV extend labeling size plus 3G, and name of the partition. LV extend not required, right? Complete absolute path slash dev slash VG slash LV hyphen R. Hyphen R is to resize the partition. Okay, this should be given. So that is how we can extend the disk partition. Okay, we'll see practically in a lab. Okay, then only you can understand even better. Okay, now LSBLK. See, if you see, we have a disk. Uh, if you see here, we have a four disk. Okay, A, B, E, F. First, we'll see PVs. Sorry, typo. Now, if you see here, physical volumes, whatever the disk that we have seen here, A, B, E, F, all disk A, B, E, F. These all are disk. Okay, here P size, physical size, the size of the total disk, and how much space free. Okay, how much the space free? We can see here, PVs and VG here, volume group. Okay, now see the VGs. Okay, see here, DBVG 2 and rel 2. Database volume group is part of the two physical volumes. So by adding the two physical volumes, this volume group is created, DBVG. And the size of the volume group is 35 GB. The free is 22 GB. Okay, and we'll see the LVs. See, we have LVs, FB data, log data, DF51. Okay, see, here we have the uh, see, if you see here, ext4 ext4 dbvg volume group. The volume group has sufficient space, 22 GB, and in LV, logical volume, which is we created with a we formatted with the partition ext4, that is 4 GB. Okay, if you see here, ext4 4.9 GB, and available space is 4.6 GB. Okay, only 1% is used. It is mounted in log data. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the space with a 2 GB. Okay, right now it has a 4.9 GB. The free space in volume group. Okay, if you see here, dbvg 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 we see a dbvg volume space is 22 GB. Okay, volume group has a sufficient space, that is 22 GB. Now as we have a sufficient space, 22 GB, I'm going to extend the LV. Okay, so what is the LV that I'm going to extend is log data. Okay, log data because it is formatted with the file system ext4. Okay, or else we'll see. Yeah. So how to extend the LV? What is the command to extend the LV? we have discussed, right? LV extend hyphen L capital and plus 2 GB slash dev slash db hyphen hyphen vg slash log data. So we are extending the un hyphen r. See the command to extend the LV is LV extend hyphen L plus 2 GB. How much size I'm going to extend is 2 plus 2 GB slash dev. What is this? We should give the absolute path of the LV slash dev and volume group and LV name log hyphen data. So this is the LV. This is the LV. So I'm going to extend. Okay. So if you see here, size of LV dbvg has changed from 5 GB to 7 GB. Okay. Now if you see here, LVs. Okay. Now if you see here, log data earlier it was 5 GB. Now log data is 7 GB. Okay. So this is how we can extend the LV. Okay. So disk extending is one of the important concepts in LVM because with we have a sufficient space. We may not have the LV doesn't have sufficient space. So in that case, we want to extend the LV uncensored partition. But if this volume group has sufficient space, then we can straight away extend the partition. Okay, the extend the partition is to LV extend and labeling size and how much size and absolute path and hyphen R. Hyphen R is to resize, hyphen L is labeling size. How much size we are going to extend to the partition. Okay. Now the next case is uh, adding the disk. Adding the disk if the volume group does not have sufficient space, then adding a disk to virtual machine and the disk we converted to physical volume. This physical volume is added to the volume group by extending the VG extend. Okay, VG extend and name of the VG and the device name. Device is disk that we have added. So the physical volume disk. So likewise we extend. After extending, we can extend the LV. Okay, so to extend this same LV extend. Now we'll see how to reduce the partition. Okay, uh, extending the reducing the partition is as important as extending the partition. Okay, for example, we have given, for example, the partition has a 500 GB volume, but we would notice that the partition doesn't use or doesn't use complete the partition size that is given. So therefore what we decided to reduce the partition space. To reduce the partition space, how to do, we'll see. Okay, so how to reduce a partition. How to reduce a partition in LVM. So how to reduce a partition? This is extend. This is extending the partition. Reduce the partition. So here, uh, I'm actually extending the disk, not like, see, sorry, I'm sorry, my bad. So extending the disk can be done even with a XFS file system. XFS, sorry, XFS file system also can be done. Uh, disk, so disk extending cannot be done with the partition with either ext2, 3, 4 and XFS file system. But here, reducing the partition, disk reducing. Sorry, when we extend the when we wanted to extend the disk, file system format is not a matter. Whatever the file system, we can extend the disk. But when it comes to reduce the partition, reduce the partition only be done with if the partition is formatted with the file system either ext3 or ext4. Okay, so ext3 or ext4 file system, if the partition is formatted with either ext3 or ext4, then only we can reduce the partition. Okay, so how to reduce the partition? Here, when it comes to extending the disk, we don't have to unmount and do the extending the partition. But here, we have to unmount the partition. Unmounting the partition is it is like a downtime. Downtime in sense nobody access the partition. Okay, so it's a downtime activity. Reducing the partition. Reducing the partition is a downtime activity. Downtime activity, and uh, we have to unmount the partition. We have to unmount the partition before reduce reducing the partition. Before reducing the partition, we have to unmount. Therefore, hence, partition not will not be available to access. Okay. See, uh, see, when we extend the partition, we don't take any downtime or we don't unmount the partition. Okay. But when it comes to reducing the partition, we have to we have to take downtime because it's a downtime activity and the partition will not be available to access. Okay. So reduce the partition, we have to ensure that nobody access the partition, and only reduce the partition is done if the partition is formatted either with ext3 or ext4 file system. Okay, now we'll see. Okay, now so first step one is unmount the partition. So first we have to unmount the partition. What is the command? Umount slash mount point. What is the mount point? Mount point. Okay. And since it is the partition will not be accessible, right? Therefore, we have to get approval from the respective people to ensure that we are doing this downtime activity. Nobody has any issue with accessing the data. Okay, so we just have to ensure that nobody get any trouble while we are doing this activity. Okay, so first we have to unmount the partition. After unmount the partition, we have to repair the file system. Repair the file system. So repairing the file system by issuing the command e2 a file system check and absolute path. Okay, absolute LV partition absolute path. For example, slash dev slash vg slash lv and hyphen f. Okay, here file system after unmounting we are checking the file system if any you know partitions are corrupted or not. If it is corrupted, just ensure that it is in the proper alignment. Okay, so e2 fs check, e2 file system check, hyphen y is s. Okay, hyphen f is forcefully and slash dev slash vg, this is absolute lv, this absolute partition path, slash device slash volume group slash lv. LV is partition details. Okay, we are giving absolute LV path, and E2FS is to E2FS CK is file system check, hyphen Y is S, and hyphen F is forcefully. Okay, now after we repairing the file system, we we resize the partition space. Resize the partition space. Resizing the partition space. Okay. So how much space we would like to reduce? Okay. For example, let's say uh, LV partition has a 20 GB. Okay. So for instance, LV has a 20 GB. Okay. 20 GB space. For instance, LV has 20 GB space. So I wanted to reduce a I want to reduce a 15 GB. Okay, so because 20 GB is too much, we have given the for LV size. So I just want to reduce the 15 GB. So how to reduce the then? What's the command to reduce? If we want to reduce the 15 GB, the remaining LV space is 5 GB, right? So what is the command? LV has 15 GB and wanted to reduce 15 GB. Okay, so here LV has a 20 GB. So LV has a 20 GB. Decided, not wanted. Decided to reduce a 15 GB. So if we reduce 15 GB, Then how much LV has? 5 GB, right? Okay. So command, let's say the command to resize the partition. LV reduce hyphen L, sorry, not resize. See, no, see, LV has a total 20 GB. So we decided to reduce the 15 GB. So to reduce in sense removing. Uh, Out of 20, we are removing 15 GB. Now how much the LV, how much space the LV has? 5 GB. Now we are resizing. Resize command is resize resize to fs and give the absolute path lv absolute path slash dev slash vg slash lv and how much space we want to keep. So I want to keep the 5 GB. Okay, so this is the command resize to fs slash dev slash vg slash lv and how much space? 5 GB. Now after resizing we want to give the remaining space to volume group. Okay, relieving, we are relieving the space to the volume group. So lv reduce hyphen l hyphen, we are reducing 15 GB, right? So I'm relieving 14.8 GB. Absolute path slash dev slash vg slash lv. And see here I'm mentioning VG volume group. Okay, don't give here as VG or LV. You should mention the volume group name and you should mention the LV name. Okay, please mention here your volume group name, your LV name. Don't mention here slash VG slash LV. I'm just giving the example volume group and LV name. We should give the complete absolute path slash dev slash volume group name slash LV name, which is you wanted to reduce or resize the partition. Okay, and yeah, so that is uh, a command. The command is reduce space. Reduce the space from LV. Okay, so first unmount the partition and repair the file system and reduce the next one is next step is we have a mount, right? We have unmounted. Now mount back the LV. U mount slash dev slash vg slash lv slash mount point. So here mount point whatever we have mentioned here that should be here u mount point and we have to repair the file system. Okay, repairing the file system is to ensure that if any sectors, any file system format is corrupted or not. To so before we resizing we have to ensure that everything is fine by issuing the command e2 fsckf e2 file system check hyphen ys slash dev slash vg slash lv absolute lv and hyphen f is forceful. Okay, then after repairing the file system we resize the partition space. For instance, it has a 20 GB. Now we decided to 15 GB because no, we don't want the 15 GB space unutilized. Therefore we want to reduce. So what we decided, we resize the file system. So we want to keep only 5 GB. And here we are reducing the LV. LV reduce, L-L is capital labeling size, and how much space here, 14.8 GB. I'm relieving into volume group. I'm giving back to volume group. This is the space, because in 15 GB 200 200 MB, here 14.8. We are not giving complete 15 GB back to the volume group. We are giving 14.8 GB. Remaining 200 MB is I'm holding as buffering. Okay, so we should to relieve or to reduce the space from the LVEs, we should maintain the at least to 100 or 200 or 50 MB as buffering. Okay, we should not completely give the complete size. Whatever the size we wanted to reduce should not give back to the volume group. We should at least keep the minimum 50 or 100 MB as buffering, and give the space back to the volume group. Okay, 14.8 GB. So 200 MB I just hold it as buffering, and giving back to the volume group. And after that, I'm mounting the LV. I'm mounting back the LV. So this is slash div slash VG LV. LV VG is volume group. LV is the name of the LV. Mount point is the point where we mounted the partition. Okay, so don't give like mount point and LV and VG. Just mention your mount point details, mount point LV name and VG name and all. I'm just giving here. So this is how we reduce the partition. We will see practically in our lab. Okay, and one thing is the to reduce the partition, the partition should be formatted either with the ext3 or ext4 file system. So reducing partition cannot be done with the xfs file system. So that there is one thing you should remember go before you start reducing the partition. Okay, now we'll see practically. Okay, now see, we have extend the partition, right? That is ext4. So ext4 we have extend the partition. There is a size. Yeah, sorry. Log data. Log data is a LV. There is a partition. If you see here, LVs log data has a 7 GB. Okay. Now I wanted to reduce the 5 GB. Okay, I want just to keep the 2 GB. So how to do? Okay, so how to do to reduce the 5 GB? Because see, and one more thing is ext4. We have the partition formatted with ext4. So I can reduce the partition. I don't have any issues, because if the file system partition has formatted with a file system like a XFS, then we can't reduce the partition. Okay, so we can go ahead and reduce the partition. The partition, that is LV, which is what? Log data is 7 GB. Okay, now let's reduce the partition. The first is uh, the first thing is we just have to remember is whether this partition is formatted with the ext4 ext3 or not. So the first case is proof ext4 is formatted. Okay, after that we have to unmount the partition. Okay, so how to unmount the partition? You mount slash log hyphen data. Now it is unmounted. Okay, log data is a mount point where partition details are stored. Okay, partition details, that is where the data is written generally. Okay, mount point is different from the partition. The partition is we keep the partition details and everything into the mount point. Mount point is indirect way or indirect location to store the data. Okay, generally it is stored in the LV partition, but this is the location where we keep the files, we write the data, we read the data from this mount point. Okay, so once we unmounted the partition, then what we do, we have to repair the file system. So what's the command? E2 fs ck hyphen y and absolute path slash dev slash db hyphen underscore vg slash log data. See here, f2 csk file system check hyphen sorry hyphen y and lv absolute path slash dev volume group, name of the volume group, and lv. Okay, lv and hyphen f. F is to forcefully, okay, if any file systems are corrupted or not, okay, and if any sectors are not in line, this by issuing this command, it ensure that everything is okay, fine. See here, checking directory structure and connectivity reference counts and group summary information, everything is verified and perfect. Now we have performed the file system repairing. Okay, now we'll reduce the partition. Okay, what's the command? Resize to fs slash dev slash db un underscore vg slash log data 5g. See, if you see here, this it has a 7 GB. Okay, so here we are trying to keep the size of the partition LV is 2 GB. Okay, so out of 7 GB, we just want to have the 2 GB and to giving 5 GB, remaining 5 GB to volume group. Okay, so whatever the how much size we want for the LV, we mention here. Okay, so first resize the 2fs and absolute LV path and the how much size we are going to keep for the particular LV. Okay, and enter. Okay, so if you see here, resizing the file system on to 5 GB blocks. The file system on now is 5 GB blocks log. Okay, now we have resized. Now we have to reduce the space. So after resizing, next step is reducing. The command is reduce. Sorry, lv reduce l. So we, out of 7 GB, we want to give it back 5 GB to volume group. Therefore, so how much we can mention is 4.9 GB. Okay, slash. See here, as I said, hyphen 4.9 GB. So though we I am though I'm intending to give it back the 5 GB, but we should not mention here completely 5 GB. So 100 MB, I'm just keeping it as buffering. Therefore, we should give the 4.9 GB. Okay. So we should not give it back complete the size 5 GB. So at least a 50 MB or 100 MB, just keep it as a buffering. Okay. Excuse me. And absolute path slash dev slash db vg slash log data. So we are reducing reducing this, we are giving it back 5 GB to volume group. Here asking, do you really want to reduce? Yes. Now if you see here, size of the logical volume, that is partition, changed from 7 GB to 2 GB. Okay. Now again, let's mount back the LV. Mount slash here when we excuse me, when we are unmounting, first we are unmounting, we only unmount the partition. We are mounting, we should add the absolute path of LV. Okay. So mount slash dev slash vg slash db underscore vg slash log data slash log data. See here, mount slash dev, this is the absolute path of the LV, and a slash log data. Now it is mounted. If you see LVs, now the partition LV partition LV partition size is 2 GB. Okay. So earlier it is 7 GB. Now to we have reduced to 5, and we have reduced to 2 GB. Okay. So total LV size is 2 GB. So this is how we can reduce the partition. Okay, uh, uh, disk partition with an LVM method. So we can extend the partition, we can reduce the partition, but we should for partition we require downtime. Okay, so so when we unmount the partition, the partition will not be accessible. Therefore, we just have to inform the respect to the people or users, whoever is going to access the partition. So we take the downtime. During the downtime, we do disk partition reducing. Once disk reducing is done, then we mount back. After mount back, then we ensure that it is accessible, data is written or data is read from the partition. Okay, so that's disk extending and the disk reducing. So these two are very important in LVM, extending the disk and reducing the partition LVM. So I hope this class is helpful and informative. And thanks for watching. And have a great and nice day. And please come to my channel and watch my videos. Thank you for watching. And if you have any queries and questions or comments, please leave in a comment section. If you want me to cover any topics, please please mention in the text. Okay, thank you for watching. Have a nice day.